Hey everyone, welcome to the Legal Service Delivery Getting Started with webinar. I'm Gaurav Devanji and good morning from Dallas, Texas. So we have a good audience here, so we'll get started. So one second, yep, we have a good audience. So we'll kick off with an introduction. So I'm Gaurav from the product success team, and what my team works is making sure that our customers get the most out of their product investment, in this case with their legal service delivery investment. And I'm based off of Dallas, Texas. And I have with me two of my colleagues from the legal service delivery business unit who will be helping answering some of your questions as well. So I have Senthil, who's the director for the inbound product team for LSD. And we have Justina, who in fact comes from a legal background, who is our lead SC for the legal service delivery application. So we'll be trying our best to keep a track of all your questions as you have them along the webinar and trying to answer it. Some of the questions we may answer live, and there's a Q&A section that we have planned at the end of the webinar where we'll dive in deeper into some of the more detailed questions that you have. A quick note on our safe harbor. So some of the statements that we may make that pertain to roadmap may be forward-looking, and they may change as we near that date. So anything that we say on roadmap or any future capability is covered under the safe harbor. So the agenda for this webinar. So the intent here is essentially making sure that you understand what the legal service delivery app contains. And as you're planning your implementation journey, you are aware of the tools that are available to you to make sure that you help streamline the business for your customers or for your organization. So we'll start off with the legal maturity model, the different phases of implementation that you can plan. We'll do a quick overview of the components that are delivered as a part of the legal service delivery application. And then we'll dive deep into some of the more foundational components, legal request and legal matter, to and see how these building blocks essentially fit together to make sure that you can help translate the legal processes for your customers. And then we'll briefly touch upon the legal practice area applications and the Q&A. At the end of the slide deck, there is also a list of assets that have noted. So, and the slide deck will be shared out with you. So in case you wanted to dive in deeper, or if you had any more questions, that's where you can find the resources to do so. And a quick disclaimer about some of the slides that you may see. So you may realize that some of the slides actually have a lot more technical information than I cover during this presentation. And that is by design, since we want you to have those resources and we want you to have that information. But as a purpose of this webinar, my goal is to make sure that you understand how these parts fit together and in what particular use cases they are used. So that is the main intent. But at the same time, I still want you to go away with all the technical details so that when you're actually implementing with your partner or yourself, you have that information to refer back to. And we will dive into a little technical details as a part of this webinar, some configuration items. So you may, if you are coming from a legal background or a more functional role, you may see that some elements are a little technical. So bear with me on that. And on that note, if you wanted a more business-oriented session, we have that planned as well on April 19th. That's where our legal general counsel, Russ, will be having a panel discussion with some of our customers as to how they are driving legal service delivery in their organizations, as well as in-house at ServiceNow. So we'll copy the link to that in the chat. So feel free to register for that webinar as well, if you haven't already. So diving into this session, we'll start off with the maturity model. So as you're starting out with your legal service delivery journey, the first step, or rather the first phase that we are trying to accomplish, is making sure that we move off of spreadsheets and emails when it comes to both submitting legal requests or requests to legal, as well as working on those requests. So as a part of any implementation, the recommended first step would be to list out or identify all the legal workflows or the types of legal requests that the legal team is getting, either over email or phone or any other channel that you may have, and making sure that those are translated into the ServiceNow as requests or matter in the ServiceNow legal service delivery application. And at the same time, we also need to make sure that those requests are routed to the right teams. So you can set up routing rules based on the types of the request or any other parameters. So that would be the first step, or rather phase one of the recommended path for adopting legal service delivery. The next step would be diving in deeper into each individual request. So, you may identify a particular request, a legal request that has a set of a fixed number of steps that need to be carried out. So, for example, if there is like investigations workflow, then it will have an investigations, like an interview phase and a remediation phase. So you can define those activities in the workflow itself, so that every time that request is worked upon, it's the same set of standard activities that take place. At the same time, you can also look at some integrations like e-signature and stuff. So that is the second phase, I would say, diving in deeper into each individual workflow to make sure that there is some you enforce the standard process to, one, drive efficiency, and two, reduce costs through shared services. The third step would be if you have more advanced integrations with any other legal applications that you may have in your organizations. So to add one more level of automation to the workflows that we may have previously defined. So to reduce the swivel chair, if any. And at the same time, we can, in this phase, in the third phase, we can look at KPIs and insights to make sure that our executives have the right visibility into how legal is working, to try to help so that it can help minimize the risks through those. So we'll discuss the use cases for each of them in detail, but this is the typical recommended flow. So we start with making sure that we get off of spreadsheets and emails. Then we add some automation, and as the third step, we add more automation and make sure that we have the right insights. And these are the core components that that come with the legal service delivery application. The one here on the left, legal request management, legal matter management, counsel center. Some of these we'll cover in details. And as I said previously, we'll try to see what use cases are the best fit for each particular component and how these components work together with each other. At the same time, we have these legal practice area apps, which are made using these components as well, but they are for specific use cases and they have some pre-built integrations built in. So as a part of these apps, you'll also get, if you decide to install these apps, you'll also get some predefined intake forms that you can use as a reference and build on top of. Once again, we'll dive in deeper into all of those. So starting out, first step, ensuring that legal self-service and the legal intake process is translated into ServiceNow. So currently, as an employee, if you look at it, let's say if you may have a request for legal. So some of the common requests as an employee that I may have is I have some marketing content that I'm publishing and I need legal to approve it before I do. I plan to sell my RSUs and then I need a stock pre-clearance before I do. Or I'm collecting some personal information and personal information in a new system. So I need legal to approve that I'm clear to store, employee names and credit card information in that particular system. So currently, many organizations that we've talked to, currently they have a defined mailbox. They have a defined mailbox where the requests come in and essentially then they are tracked through spreadsheets. And it often happens that, some of the requests are lost or they get more, they take more time to process or overlooked, or multiple people end up working on the same request. So first and foremost, the goal is to streamline the intake process as well as the routing process. So the intake comes in through ServiceNow, a ServiceNow portal where the employee can go in and enter in the request. And then based on the nature of the request, it can be routed to the right team so that the leadership as well as the teams have a clear understanding and an idea of the task that they're working on. And these are some of the user-facing elements of it. So this is the employee center legal service delivery topic page. So as you can see over here, there are some requests as well as some articles that the employee can read. So they can filter by request or they can filter by article. And based on the request that they want to make, they can click on the appropriate request form and enter in the details. At the same time, you can add, you can have a virtual agent capability to help drive the deflection even further. So if some of the things are fairly straightforward, you can look to deflect them. So for example, stock pre-clearance, if the person in question is not an access person who does not have access to internal information, as well as, if they are within the stock trading window, then they can skip submitting that request. And that's where the virtual agent chatbot can come in. Or they can also read a knowledge article to help drive deflection. So this is the process where essentially as an end user or a requester, so I come to the legal page, I read the knowledge articles, and then I find the right request. I submit that request. So as you can see over here, in this case, the request has certain mandatory fields which are specific to the nature of the information that I'm submitting. So this can be configured. And once that is submitted, I have access to my request, legal request, where I can track the activity. I can have a conversation with the legal ops team member who's working on my request. I can attach additional items. This is much better than me having sent an email and wondering whether it has been picked up, whether it's getting the attention, what is the estimated timeline, and that email chain having a list of attachments and other correspondence that I may have sent them. And from the legal ops team perspective, this is the view that we have. So this is the legal counsel center. So if I'm a part of the legal ops team, I can go to the unassigned request for my team, or rather my unassigned request that I have access to, and I can either assign it to myself, or my manager can assign that request for me. So depending how the process is, you can define those workflows. And then once I dive into the request, this is my view as I'm working on the request. So I can get the details. I can see the intake information that the requester had submitted. At the same time, I have access to the Council Assist, where I can search for knowledge articles, internal knowledge articles that may be related to that request, or I can search for other similar requests. So this is the flow, and we'll dive in deeper into the request management a little more. So let's say that I'm submitting a request for content review, as we discussed earlier. So I have some content that I need reviewed by legal. So in that case, first of all, I'll identify a practice area. So for my friends who come from an HR background, think of practice area as something similar to centers of excellence. So we can identify a practice area, and each practice area can have multiple intake forms associated with it. So over here in the screenshot, we have the general practice area, and in there we have the content review intake form, as well as a general legal request intake form. We can define practice area leads who have visibility into the practice area. At the same time, more of a technical segue, but we have these predefined practice area tables. So you can decide what, where the, decide what table the data comes to as a part of the, that is submitted through the intake forms. And we have these delivered out of the box practice area tables. And there's two sets of practice area tables, one extending request and the other one extending matter. So this is the one extending request. So there is a similar set of tables that extend matter. And we'll dive in deeper into the request and matter, but just want to call it out. And on the content review example, we have the concept of record producers. So this is where you define the questions and the variables and the intake that the user answers. So you define the fields over here. So I've defined the field for content type and the values, then purpose and approval date. And you can optionally make things mandatory. You can create a field for attachments and make it mandatory if needed. So this is where you define the part that the requester sees and where they enter in the information. The next is intake forms. Intake forms is where it all comes together. So we define the record producer and we define the practice area. So this is where we tie it all together. So intake forms is essentially a record where those two are tied together. At the same time, you can define additional assignment rules. So whom does the request get routed to? As well as you can define the templates, matter templates. We'll get into those in more detail. And you can also define certain options as to how the request is fulfilled. So essentially, you can decide whether the request can be reopened, and you can define whether if that request is promoted to matter, then the assignment group is editable. We'll get into more details, but that was the request side of it. And then we have external storage capability as well, optional. But at any point, if you had a requirement, let's say that any attachments that are attached to the request need to be automatically stored in a third-party file system, the ones that we support right now, Box, Google Drive, OneDrive, SharePoint. But in that case, or let's say a part of the request is an e-signature, and that signed document should be stored at a particular folder in your company Box, where all the signed NDAs are stored. So in that case, you can define these integrations fairly straightforward and out of the box. At the same time, when we'll be working with matters, if there's any artifacts associated with that matter, and if you wanted them stored at once, a single repository, that's where you can define it. Just a quick note, technical note in terms of security, that out of the box, whoever has access to the record, so the legal request record or the legal matter record, will be given access through the record, through the integration to that particular file on the external storage as well, which you can change then. And instead of seeing direct attachments in the Legal Counsel Center, you see URLs to the attachment that you can click on and go to and change the retention policy if needed and change the access if needed. Once again, optional, but just wanted to call it out. And here are some of the other things that you can configure as well as a part of requests. So if, a content review request, you wanted a standardized response for every content review request, you can create a response template to automate the message or to have a reusable message to ensure consistency and a proper standard in the experience. You can configure knowledge bases and attach them to the intake forms just to ensure that there is proper deflection and assignment rules and notifications along the way. We have the concept of Legal Counsel Center as we discussed previously. This is where the fulfiller, so the legal ops team essentially, come in and work on the legal requests that come in. So they can add in notes to the requester and they can have a conversation with the requester to request additional documents. This is something that I particularly find super useful and our customers find valuable as well, the ability to search on similar related requests so that if there is precedent for something, then they can just piggyback off of that and respond to the request straight away. Or if there is a knowledge article, they can look for it. So they don't have to leave this screen to go around looking for additional stuff to support them fulfilling the request. And Legal Counsel Center, you can you can add additional forms and lists, but this essentially is supposed to be the one place that I would say 95% of the legal ops team who are working on request and matter need to be in ServiceNow. For advanced users, they might want to go to other ServiceNow views, but the recommendation is for the legal ops team to have everything that they need within the Legal Counsel Center itself, just so that it's a little more streamlined and straightforward and they don't have to go around looking for things. And this essentially is useful, as we have noticed, for the legal teams who may or may not be as used to working in the ServiceNow application. So this is a good starting point to helping them, getting their feet wet with ServiceNow instead of them seeing that, being overwhelmed with the lists and forms and the number of options that they have to select from and work on. So this essentially is like a streamlined to the point view that they can, this can be the only thing that they'll have to worry about for most audiences. And we talked about submitting the request. So we also have the capability of submitting the request in mobile and through the Now Mobile app. And from a fulfiller in the Now Agent app, you can work on your legal requests or legal matters as well. So here's a view for that. I see a lot of questions there. So we'll pause after legal matter management if there's any items, since these two topics are fairly tied together. And yeah, so in terms of legal matter management. So think of a use case. Let's think of a use case where I'm submitting a request. One of the things that we talked about was the privacy assessment. So there is this system, knowledge 22, knowledge 23, let's say. So I'm collecting customers or employees' personal information, first name, last name, as well as, let's say, some address, mailing address, and credit card number as a part of my conference registration. So now I've submitted a request to legal for a privacy assessment to ensure that I'm cleared from a legal perspective to store this information in this system. So as a legal fulfiller, a legal ops team member, I get this request. And then, I use the counsel assist, as we talked about previously, to see if, hey, I don't know what the system is. Let me search if there is a knowledge article on the system. If we have a clear from our team to store that information, I don't find any knowledge article. Let me see if there is an existing request. If someone has made a similar request to store such information in this system, in the legal counsel center, all within this screen, I don't find it either. You know what? I don't know enough about this system, and I need more a technical analysis of this, which will need additional work. So that's where I would promote this to a matter. So essentially, on this form, I have this option to either create a matter or tie the request to an existing matter. So in case there's multiple requests having tied to the same investigation being carried out, they can be tied to the same matter. Each request doesn't need to have its own matter, but essentially you can promote a request that needs any additional work or needs cross-functional work to a matter. So as a legal ops team member, I will click on the create matter and I will select the matter template over here. So what the matter template is essentially the tasks and phases and some of the predefined values that are set to matter that are added to the matter record that is created. So in this case, since it ties to privacy, I will select a privacy template over here. What it will do is it will pre-populate some values for the matter that is created. So it will, in this case, it populates the practice area. It populates the assignment group. So it gets assigned to the right team. It gets assigned to the right owners. And in addition, it creates these two phases for me. Since I selected the privacy template, it creates the project evaluation and the risk definition phases. And it creates some tasks as a part of those phases. So each task is tied to a phase, and that task can be additionally assigned. So when I promoted that request, privacy request to a matter, I selected the privacy template, it automatically created these phases and tasks. And now it assigned a task to the IT team to carry out a security assessment for that new system in question and provide a readout of the risk and any mitigation. So once I have that information in the matter, that's where I can go in and put in those details to the end user that this system needs to have these checks in place, or this is the mitigation strategy, or essentially however I may want to respond back. But the concept of matter helped me collaborate with the IT team, create additional tasks, and then help respond to the end user's request. Similarly, in some cases, you may want to create the matters directly. So if there is a subpoena that needs some work, so end users usually won't submit a subpoena as a request. It has to be a matter that is created directly. So in that case, you can create a matter directly as well, or you can promote it from a request. What is the difference between request and matters is one of the common questions that we get. So think of request as something that is usually more straightforward to respond to and answer. So a content review can be a request. Matter is something that needs additional work that can take more time to complete, is a likely parameter as well that you can determine whether you want to have it as a request or a matter, or a request that can be promoted as a matter. You can also, see if, you need cross-functional collaboration. So in case you need a task for the HR team to lean into, in that case, it can be a matter where you create a task for the HR team and that task is tracked as a part of the matter. Requests do not have tasks associated with them. Matters do. And as a part of the matter, you can have, so this is the matter council center. So as we talked about phases, we talked about tasks. We can have related requests. So each matter in this question can have several requests that are related to this particular matter. And we can have artifacts and milestones. So artifacts are essentially any documents or emails or anything that may be pertinent to this particular matter. And in this case, previously tying to the external storage discussion as well, you can make sure that these artifacts are copied over to your external storage. So that was matter. Matter template we briefly discussed. So this is, you can define a template, and this helps to standardize the way matters, the way matters are worked at. So in our previous case, we talked about subpoena. So a subpoena, let's say it can have two matter templates. We can have, let's see, investigations, or is it here, or e-discovery. So I can, and in the investigations matter template, there's two things that I need to carry out. Each investigation matter template will definitely always have these two phases for fact collection and remediation. And each phase will have a task associated with them. So in this case, we've defined these default values that get assigned so whenever a matter is created, as well as the phases and tasks that are assigned. And here's the task matter phases and task templates. So with each template, we are defining what are the phases for that particular template. And for each phase, we are defining what are the tasks for that template. The goal being to standardize the way each matter is serviced, so that if I'm working on a particular matter and if my colleague is working on the particular matter, the way we think about it is similar and uniform. And the tasks that needs to be performed are defined as well. We have the concept of record producers once again in matter. So we talked about the subpoena example. So we can still define the intake form that the user needs to enter and the fields that will be captured. A little technical note that I've added over here, that this is how the templates that are entered in this field are translated over to the tables. And we have the concept of intake forms as well, where over here, it's the same intake forms for requests, but over here, we've defined it as matters. So in the type, you can define the type as requests. So in that case, you only expect the end users to submit requests, and you don't expect it to be ever promoted to a matter. If you expect it to be promoted to a matter, then you enter it as requests and matters. So based on the use case, you can promote it. And if you always expect it to be a matter, in our case, subpoenas, it won't ever be a request. In that case, you can just select the type as matter. And you can assign the matter templates that we talked about and defined previously. over here in this section. So before we go to the next section, I think this is a good point to pause and see if there's any questions. And I see there were a lot of questions, and Senthil and Justina have been helping out. But Senthil, Justina, is there any questions that stood out that you may want to discuss live?
I think we're all right now. I just would ask that I think Annette added a question in there. If she could just, or he or she could just expand on that a little bit, that would be helpful. We can respond.
Perfect. So good. So we'll move on to the next section, and then we'll of course pause at the Q&A section, but just wanted to make sure that if there's any pressing questions, we cover them. So requests and matters, we talked about requests being end user submitting them. They can be promoted to a matter. Matters usually more involved. Think of it as an internal project that needs some work or cross-department collaboration. And then we come to the reporting and analytics that is available out of the box here. So we have two dashboards and reports contained within the dashboard. So first is the legal ops dashboard. So this gives you the real-time information of, the number of open requests that you have, the number of matters that you have, what does your workload looks like, what does the workload looks like for your team based on the task that they are working at. What is the breakdown of the total requests and matters? So are we getting a lot of requests related to contracts, or are we getting a lot of requests related to a particular practice area? And these can be used to drive further decisions. So think of the first phase that we talked about in your implementation journey, essentially making sure that we translate everything over to ServiceNow intake forms and workflows. And then you can identify, hey, I'm getting a lot of questions around contracts. So this might be the next item that I target in my next phase. So is there something that I can do to automate contracts? So I'm getting a lot of questions on NDA. And there is an out-of-the-box capability to automatically generate NDA templates based on business logic and generate PDFs. So is that something that I want to do? Or do I want the e-signature capabilities to help speed up the requests that I'm getting around contracts? So this dashboard, this operational dashboard, can be used to identify where you're at, how the operations are going on currently in the organizations, as well as to determine the next workflow that you target or that you need to zero in on as a candidate for future automation. And then we have the concept of executive dashboard. So think of it, it's built on the ServiceNow performance analytics tool. So think of it as executive level insights and details that they can use without diving in too much into the details to drive business decisions. So in my case, let's say I've identified it's taking me 12 days. The average time is 12 days for a sales contract review, a third-party contract review request, and which we've identified is driving down the rest of our processes or driving down the rest of our supply chains. And then we take some programs or we have some actions in place to help alleviate that concern. So as an executive, I can monitor the trends in the completion time for that particular contract and see how those programs and remedies that the team has put in place is affecting that average time to resolution for that particular type of request. So just an example, but think of the executive dashboard as more high level and driving insights and identifying risks from a more strategic perspective. The legal one, it's essentially from a more tactical or operational perspective. Then we have the concept of legal practice area applications. So based on the building blocks that we looked into previously, the team has identified some very common use cases and identified best practices for some of the common workflows that our customers have and package them as practice area applications. So we won't go into too much detail into each of them, but I just want to make sure that we still cover every practice area application, and I've linked additional information where it comes to deployment guides or starter stories, so that when you're trying to dive into those practice area applications, you have those details handy. So conflict of interest, think of it as the pre-delivered workflow if you are building a conflict of interest use case using the request framework. So we have essentially done that work for you, and you can come in and tweak the approvals and the approval groups, and if needed, tweak the workflow. So as a conflict type, you have these 3 conflict types, and based on the nature of the conflict, we can determine who the approval is. And we have these pre-delivered intake forms as well. So obviously the idea is for you to go in, explore these applications, and build on and use them as a baseline to add in the additional details that are needed for your use case. Similarly, we have digital forensics, where you can define data sources that you need to gather custodial or non-custodial information for. You can enter in the details, and then the request can go in and create tasks to the right team based on the data sources defined. So this is there. And we have links to now the product documentation, as well as the deployment guide in Now Create, which is a more implementation specific resource. We have the legal investigations. So let's say if you wanted to use the, ethics and compliance and investigations workflow. And so this is these do contain some of the capabilities that are pre-built. Some of the highlight capabilities that you might want to be aware of for this one is the anonymous reporting centers. So if you want to submit an ethics complaint, you could use the anonymous reporting center. So what it does is it logs you out of ServiceNow and allows you to submit a request anonymously, so that you're not tracked essentially. And you can feel safer submitting that request. And as a part of working, as a part of the matter that will be created for that request, we can even have a standard interview template that can be used to make sure that we ensure uniformity in the way these interviews are conducted. So there are some tools and capabilities available out of the box on this. Simple contracts is one of the bigger practice area application, which has some inbuilt integrations as well. So I did see some questions around being able to generate documents and PDFs. So there are some capabilities for NDA contracts where you could, based on business logic, create template blocks for these documents. You could also have an integration with Microsoft Dynamics to pull in sales account information. There's an e-signature integration for the NDA use case, as well as those signed documents can be stored in an external provider. And these are the 3 types of simple contracts that we support. So NDA, this has the e-signature use case and the template blocks use case and the external storage. We have sales contract review. That's where the Microsoft CRM integration can come into play. And we have the third-party contracts review. So if you have a third-party contract that comes in, and if you need help from legal to review it before you sign it, this is where you can submit that request. So these were the practice area applications at a super high level. And before we dive into the question and answer section, so this was essentially a high level overview of the legal practice area application. And the intent was to ensure that you identify the basic building blocks of LSD: request, matter, legal counsel center, and the two dashboards that are available for you to build on top of. And at the same time, you being aware of the legal practice area applications that exist, so that if you have a particular use case, that would be the place that you could use as a foundation for building your process on top of. Since a lot of the work has been done already, a lot of the workflows have been built already, several of the more common integrations are in place already. And we have a poll here so which topics from the ones that we covered would you essentially want to be covered in more detail in any of the future sessions? So we are looking to have more detailed technical deep dives as well as functional deep dive sessions as a follow-up to this. So we just want to get an idea of where, yep. And I see the results coming in. So let's give it some more time. Perfect. So I'd like to share the results with you. So essentially makes sense. So we'll the request and matters being the foundational elements, we'll definitely look to deep dive more into setting up requests and setting up matters hands-on and building for some common use cases and then going in from there. And I also do acknowledge the details on the interest in legal investigations and simple contracts. So we'll definitely take that in mind as well. So I'll stop sharing the results. And we have the Q&A section. So before we dive into this, I want to take this opportunity to make you aware of the resources that are available as a part of the LSD product. So obviously you have the Now Learning courses. So I've linked the courses here. And something that I would specifically want to point out and is often overlooked is the Now Create assets. So in each legal practice area, we've linked to those particular assets as well. But if you're looking to start a new LSD implementations, definitely recommend you to check out Now Create, because we have some starter stories, some deployment guides, some pre-built PowerPoint presentations that you could use to gather additional details and essentially to identify the questions that you want answered from the business stakeholders as they look to implement. So just want to call it out, and then we'll pause for questions. So I see some questions here, and Senthil and Justina, I'll lean on you since I see several answered questions. So if there's any questions that you would want, to dive in deeper into live, or any particular topic that we want to provide more context on. And outside of that, if there's any more questions, feel free to post them as well.
And I'll just chime in. There was a question about our integration capabilities with Salesforce and DocuSign. So ServiceNow as a whole has integrations, what we call spokes with Salesforce and DocuSign. However, you may need to acquire a license to get that integration or that spoke with Salesforce. But as a part of the legal service delivery license, we have bundled together that DocuSign license. And so you would be able to leverage that.
Perfect.
And then I see another question about providing access rights and preventing the requester from being able to edit their request as a refiller once they're in the assignment group. We believe that would be something that you would have to configure that type of rule to ensure that. But if Sentinel, if you wanted to chime in and expand upon how maybe possibly they would be able to go about accomplishing that.
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, right? So we have got restrictions that you can put on a request or a matter, restricting access to different people, right? And then that's base, right? On top of it, you can provide additional access. That access could just be a watch list or could be a collaborator, depending on the nature of work that you intend the other party to, right? Watch list is just somebody who looks at what's going on with the request, but not edit anything. Whereas collaborator is somebody who gets the equal rights to go and fulfill a request, which means they can go and initiate approval, complete approvals, and so on and so forth. So that's the base security that exists in the product. Does that answer the question, or is there more to it?
Perfect. And if there's more questions, we'll still leave this line open for a couple of minutes in case there are any additional questions. But if there's one takeaway that I would suggest from this webinar is essentially an understanding of what is request, what is matter, in what use cases you'd want to use request and matter, and the distinction between them as you start having these conversations around your implementation or with your partner. And also the capabilities that are available out of the box so that you can look into those before, especially around the practice area apps, so that we can look into those before we dive in into building something like it. And I see a question on the security model. And okay, can a matter template be used to trigger RITM? So could you elaborate on the RITM, David, please? But yes, so you can create any tasks or task extensions and assign it out to any team as a part of the matter template. And it can be cross-functional for sure. So as we looked in our example, we created a task for the IT team. So similarly, we can create a request, but essentially, I'm not sure how the request scenario will fill in, because it makes more sense in an HR where we need to kick off an IT request. But as a part of the a matter, it's usually investigations or something of that sorts. But in theory, you can. So you can create, and it's intended to be used that way. And I see an open question for the COEs, sorry, security.
Yeah, you want me to jump in, Gaurav?
Yeah.
All right. So if you're referring to, David, if you're referring to where, HR different center of excellence, right? If there's a ticket created in a particular center of excellence will not be accessed by somebody who belongs to a different center of excellence. That is a very similar model that exists in the LST apps as well. So that's why, Gaurav was referring to practice areas. So you've got practice areas which are functional groups or equivalent to center of excellence in the HR world. And these practice areas are segregated, which means a request that is submitted as part of a particular practice area will only be accessible and viewable to members of that particular practice area. Again, these are all driven by groups, right? So unless you make a lawyer from a different practice area part of another practice areas group, they will not be able to see the requests that are generated as part of the other group. So it's a very similar model that is available in HR COE as well.
Perfect. Thanks, David, for the questions. And we're almost at time. So thank you everyone for attending. And once again, we have a webinar on April 19, where it's a discussion between our ServiceNow General Counsel and some of our key customers around how they are driving value through ServiceNow LSD. So hoping to see you all there. And thank you for attending today. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.